This conference will
Good
now
morning,
be
everyone.
recorded.
Sorry for the little delay. We had some technical problem here. Okay, last time we discussed about the preterm labor. I hope all of you have attended that class and you have no doubts on that. Can you hear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Right. So sorry for this delay. Anyway, I hope we are going to go ahead. Right. So last time after that preterm labor, we will continue with PROM, which is one of the important causes of preterm labor, and a very specific question that comes to you in the exams many quite often. Okay. Right. So coming to the definition, what is preterm labor? It's a spontaneous rupture of fetal membranes any time beyond 28 weeks of pregnancy, but before onset of labor. So normally we all know that in the first stage of labor, at the end of first stage of labor, there will be rupture of membranes. We all know the first stage of labor starts with the onset of true labor pains and ends with full dilatation of cervix and rupture of membranes. But if this rupture of membranes occurs before somebody goes into labor, it's called premature rupture of membranes. Now, if this spontaneous rupture occurs after 37 weeks, that's when a baby is term, you call it term PROM. If the rupture occurs before 37 weeks, you obviously call it preterm PROM. Now, if the gap between the rupture of membranes and the delivery, you know that once membranes have ruptured, there will be ascending infection. It's all open. The baby is open to the exterior now. There is no protective chorion amnion. So there will be infection. So either we induce labor or spontaneously also patients can go into labor, but whatever it is, they have to deliver. Now, if the time between rupture of membranes and delivery is more than 24 hours, you call it prolonged rupture of membranes. So rupture of membranes for more than 24 hours before delivery is defined as prolonged rupture of membranes. Obviously, it has prognostic values. Coming to the incidence, you need to know that PROM is pretty common. 5 to 10% of deliveries, 8% in term deliveries and 2% of preterm deliveries, you find premature rupture of membranes. Now, when this rupture occurs with an unfavorable cervix, obviously patient is not in labor, the cervix is going to be closed. Majority of the women will spontaneously go into labor. The very fact that the membranes have ruptured itself stimulates and releases certain hormones and substances which initiates labor. So 50% of them will be in labor after 12 hours. 86% will be in labor within 24 hours. 94% will be in labor within 48 to 96 hours. Now, which means very few patients, they would not have gone into labor. Of course, we don't wait for so long. People who are not aware of it, or be in the villages where there is no obvious opportunity to go to a close by hospital or some other cause of delay could lead to this delay. Otherwise, nowadays, with all good antenatal care and proper advice that we give to the patient, they should report to us immediately if they have ruptured their membranes, and we would do something to terminate the pregnancy. Now, coming to preterm labor, it complicates 2 to 20% of deliveries and is associated with 18 to 20% of perinatal deaths. So that is the reason we want to give so much importance, that there can be a lot of mortality and morbidity for the baby. Okay, now what is the pathophysiology? Now at term, you know that there's a programmed cell death and activation of certain catabolic enzymes like collagenase and also mechanical forces, all of which together lead to ruptured membrane. So at the end of, in a normal term patient, what will happen? The cells will also become weaker. The enzymes will break down the cell to cell cohesion, and the very stretch of that can lead to ruptured membranes. Now, what will happen at preterm? The same mechanisms will occur. However, the activation of these membranes will be premature, much earlier than term, and finally leading to the premature rupture of membranes. Now, who are at risk? Why are some people at risk? Can you identify those people who are at risk of premature rupture of membranes? So anytime there is evidence of intrauterine infections, it may be in the form of a UTI, chorioamnionitis, or any lower genital tract infection anywhere is a major predisposing factor. Now, low socioeconomic status obviously predisposes more to infections. A very low body mass index, nutritional deficiencies, smoking, history of PROM, polyhydramnios putting to increased stretch of the membranes, multiple pregnancy also same thing, and cervical incompetence. The cervix is opening up, the membranes are exposed to the exterior and they have more infections, and obviously they can have increased incidence of rupture. So when any patient has any of these risk factors, you know that they are likely candidates for premature rupture of membranes. Now coming to the individual causes, intrinsic membrane weakness. Where do you see this intrinsic membrane weakness? Infections, smoking, malnutrition, collagen deficiency. In these conditions, you find that the membrane is very weak. When there is infection, there can be proteolytic enzymes released like collagenase, and that can, or collagenase, and that can weaken the membrane. Now coming to mechanical stress, whenever the membranes are put to excessive stress, more than it can take, like in multiple pregnancy, polyhydramnios, or certain malformations, it can happen. Then certain immunological factors. All these things can be underlying causes of the premature rupture of membranes. Now, how does the patient present? There will be a typical complaint of a sudden gush of fluid per vagina. Patient will say, I was just hanging around at home and suddenly there was a watery discharge and it has wet all my clothes. All my clothes have got wet. Sometimes there can be just a little watery vaginal discharge, little bit of, when there will be a small hole in the membranes and that can sometimes seal back. So that can lead a little discharge. When the membranes rupture totally, there's a big gush of fluid, or there can be a small watery discharge. Sometimes that stops when there is a closure of the leak. There can be spontaneous closure of that leak. However, sometimes there can be a continuous leaking slowly through the vagina. So a sudden gush, little watery discharge and it can stop, or continuous leak through a small defect. What are the signs? When there is infection, because the membranes have ruptured and there can be ascending infection that can lead to chorioamnionitis, that time you will find that the maternal vital signs, there is an increasing temperature and obviously corresponding increased pulse rate. Now, whenever the maternal pulse rate increases, you know that there will be corresponding fetal tachycardia. Now, when you examine the patient per abdomen, you'll find, because when all the membranes have ruptured and leaked, what will happen to the amount of liquor? It will all come out, it will become smaller, the uterus will appear smaller than the period of gestation. And clinical assessment will show there is very reduced liquor. Now, normally when there's full liquor and the baby is nicely ballotable, but if the liquor has drained out, the uterus is just covering the baby, you'll find that the baby is filling inside the uterus and there is no ballotability at all. So that's the typical examination findings. Now, to make a diagnosis, always it is important that you go in a systematic manner. The correct diagnosis is very important. You can't just cursely say, oh, some leak is there, let's do something. You must rule out other causes. Sorry. So, like any other condition, first you will take a detailed history. You do an examination by doing a speculum examination, and then you do certain relevant investigations. So, as I said, history could be the only symptom of gush or leak. It could be gush or a slow leak. That is a typical history. On examination, you put a speculum inside the vagina and you will demonstrate liquor. Sometimes there will be no obvious leak. You might have to ask the patient to do a Valsalva maneuver. You can ask her to cough a little. Or sometimes you put a little pressure on the uterus. Just a little pressure, compression on the uterus can make the liquor obvious. There can be an obvious leak. Then you also see the order of the discharge. Sometimes a foul smelling discharge suggests chorioamnionitis. Then you also look for cord prolapse. Sometimes what can happen, like say, if there is a malpresentation, like a footling presentation in a breech, and the membranes have ruptured, what will happen? The cord can come out because it's not fitting or filling the lower uterine segment. Now, it's also important to take an endocervical swab and also to perform certain tests to confirm that it is amniotic fluid. So maybe you're sometimes getting confused. Is it a urine leak, or is it a real amniotic fluid, or is it just an excessive vaginal discharge? Any of these things could be responsible for that kind of a symptom. So you must examine and clarify what it is. Then coming to investigations. So when you want to investigate, one of the primary things you always do is an ultrasound. On ultrasound, you can see first whether the amniotic fluid is there or it's very scanty, which is an indirect evidence that it might have leaked out. Then also you need to know the diagnosis of the baby's well-being. Is the baby doing well, or the baby is in distress? Okay, so that is one thing. The size of the baby, presentation, estimated weight, all that you can see about the baby. Now, to confirm that this fluid which has come out on doing a speculum examination is actually amniotic fluid, there are few tests. One very simple test is a nitrazine paper test. Here, the simple principle is you depend on the alkaline nature of the amniotic fluid. So if you take a little strip and dip into that fluid, you will find that the nitrazine paper turns blue. So if you find the blue color, it means it is alkaline, and alkaline means it is amniotic fluid. Now sometimes you might get a false positive test when there can be contamination with blood or semen or urine or if you find infections like bacterial vaginosis or trichomoniasis, any of these things can give rise to a false positive test. So that is why we must tell the patient or indicate that they should not have just come immediately after a sexual activity, or there should be no contamination, and you exclude infections before doing the simple test. Nitrazine test is very simple. You have the small, you can see those small sticks. If you put it into that fluid and it turns blue, you know it is alkaline. Now the other one is a Ferning pattern. So if you take a drop of this vaginal fluid from the posterior fornix, you put it on a slide and let it dry over 5 minutes. If the presence of amniotic fluid is there, you will find that it forms a Fern pattern under microscope. Now this is because of the sodium chloride and protein in the amniotic fluid, which crystallizes, and it forms this Fern pattern. So if you find on microscopy this typical Ferning effect on the drying of the amniotic fluid, you know you're looking at leaking, clear leaking of amniotic fluid. Now there's some other tests like Nile blue sulfate test. You just take a few cells from, or rather they take that liquid from the vaginal posterior fornix, centrifuge it, and then stain it with 0.1% Nile blue sulfate. You will find that it turns orange. That means it is a amniotic fluid. Now we have other commercial kits available, what is called AmniSure. AmniSure, as the name says, that it's sure that it is amniotic fluid, as simple as that. It is based on immune chromatological principle. So here this test will detect certain chemicals present in the amniotic fluid. However, the false positive rates can be up to 19 to 30%. So you can see this commercial sticks which are available. They're a little expensive, but you dip that stick into the posterior fornix, and after taking that swab, you insert it into a little solution that they give, and immediately within 5 to 10 minutes you can interpret it. You can see there are certain lines which come in. So you can see the dipstick before, there is nothing. If it is negative, there's a single line, and if it is positive, you find those 2 lines, typically like a pregnancy kit test. So that tells you very simply whether it is amniotic. Now there's one other test which is an invasive test, although it's a very specific test and very, you can be definite about that confirmation. So here a needle is used to inject indigo carmine dye into the amniotic fluid. So you can do an ultrasound, and under ultrasound guidance, you can push in this needle and push in indigo carmine. Now if there is really PROM, this blue dye will go into the amniotic fluid and come out, and it will stain the pad which you can keep there. So if you find that the pad is staining, it means that the leaking is really from the amniotic fluid. Although it can give a definitive diagnosis, it is rarely done because it's invasive and you don't want to expose the patient to risk of infection. Right. So those were all for confirmation of diagnosis. So you took a history of a gush of fluid, you examined, you did a speculum examination, you found liquid coming out. On the liquid, you did various tests like your Ferning test, you did your nitrazine test, you did your AmniSure test, all these different indigo carmine, whatever test, and you finally confirmed it. Now, what will you do with this patient? You want to take a decision about managing the patient. If you have to treat her, you first have to know her general condition, whether she can continue with pregnancy or you have to terminate. In other words, to decide whether she has to be terminated or not, you need to know the well-being of the mother and the baby. If either of them is put to risk, if there's any risk of continuing pregnancy, you must terminate. So what investigations will you do? A full blood count. You look for evidence of infection from urine for urine analysis and culture. You do a high vaginal swab for culture. Then from the vaginal pool, you can take fluid for estimation of phosphatidylglycerol and lecithin sphingomyelin ratio. Now this test tells you the maturity of the fetal lung. So it can tell you what is the maturity of the baby's lung. Also, you can do an ultrasound, sorry, and cardiotogography for a non-stress test. So that will tell you the well-being of the fetus. So ultrasound, you can know the size of the baby and also the well-being. Now coming to complications, why are you worried about PROM? So there can be complications in the mother, in the baby. For the mother, what is immediate risk? Or rather, okay, we'll just do this in another format. Maternal and fetal complications. For the mother, there's more risk of infections because it is open now. Membranes have ruptured. So ascending infection can lead to infections of the membranes, what we call chorioamnionitis. Now, adjacent to the chorioamnion is the endometrium. It can also lead to endomyometritis. Then it can lead to wound infection. If such a patient, you are going to do a cesarean section, It can lead to wound infection. It can lead to a pelvic abscess, because whatever infection is occurring inside, it collects in the dependent part, that's the pouch of Douglas, what we call as pelvic abscess. And if it is not taken care of, proper antibiotics are not given, it can lead to bacteremia. It can spread all over into the general circulation, what we call bacteremia. So there can be maternal sepsis of various degrees. Also, you can lead to placental abruption. The placenta can separate it when there's a sudden gush, sudden release of that fluid. There will be a negative pressure, and it can separate the placenta from the uterine wall. So that leads to what is called abruption. And so these patients are at risk of PPH. And that PPH, if uncontrolled, or sometimes can lead to DIC. Okay. Now there are other fetal complications, like you could have fetal inflammatory response syndrome. You can have neonatal sepsis, sepsis for the baby because baby is exposed. Bronchopulmonary dysplasia because the lungs are immature. You could have a cerebral palsy. You could have prematurity related risks like respiratory distress syndrome, intraventricular hemorrhage, necrotizing enterocolitis, or cystic periventricular leukomalacia. So any of these are complications related to all premature babies. So you could have any of these complications. So you must be aware that PROM must be identified, because if you leave it alone, mother can be exposed to ascending infection, which can be very bad, and it can lead to placental abruption. And in the baby also, baby is exposed to infection and risk of prematurity. Okay. Now, how will you manage? The management will depend upon various factors, like gestational age. Very simple, because if it is a term, you can simply terminate the pregnancy. There's no big issue. But suppose the age is less, preterm, and the membranes have ruptured. Now you're worried that if you terminate, you will have problems of prematurity. If you continue, if you just leave it like that and have an expectant management, you are exposing the baby to risk of infection. So the gestational age is very important. Then availability of NICU, fetal presentation, the fetal pattern, any distress, fetal distress, is she in labor, and if at all, the cervical assessment. So the first initial assessment would be, first of all, is there any distress? If either the mother or the baby is at distress, you are going to terminate. Then correct dating, whether it is term or not. That's important, I told you. Any infection, look for signs of infection, chorioamnionitis, like fever, tachycardia, maternal fetal tachycardia, any of those things, you cannot continue pregnancy, you have to terminate. And exclude occult cord prolapse. Cord prolapse means immediate distress. So these are the initial assessment. What means immediately you have to terminate if any of these things are there, fetal or maternal distress, or if it's term, if there's evidence of infection, or cord prolapse. You cannot wait. The secondary assessment is, once you've decided you have to terminate, you have to look for fetal position, because you have to decide how to terminate. You go to do a vaginal method, vaginal delivery, or a cesarean. So if say the baby is in a transverse line, or some breach which cannot be delivered vaginally, then you have to decide for a cesarean. Similarly, cervical assessment. Is it favorable or not? Is the cervix soft, effaced? Is it dilating or not? Then determine the lung maturity. Like I said, phosphatidylglycerol and lecithin sphingomyelin ratios to know the extent of lung maturity. Does the baby need a surfactant, or do we have to give steroids, because the steroids will accelerate the lung maturity, and so on. And also quantify the amount of amniotic fluid. If it's grossly lost, it's a dry labor. So you have to keep in mind whether you can decide the normal vaginal delivery or not, depending on the amount of liquor also. So these are the secondary things that you look for: baby's position, cervical condition, lung maturity, and the amount of amniotic fluid. So as I just told you now, immediately delivery, you should decide when: maternal fetal distress, infection, abruption, cord prolapse. Okay. Now, if you think that you can wait, that is when we don't have to deliver. You call it expectant management. Expectant means you are waiting and watching. It is waiting for maturity. When will you wait? Whenever the baby looks premature. If the baby is term, there is no discussion. You will simply terminate. You cannot wait for an infection to occur. So the expectant management will only be there when the baby is preterm, and you want to wait, and you want to wait for the maturity of the baby, or at least if it's very preterm, you know it's going to take time for maturity. At least you win time by giving them steroids. You have enough time for steroids. So the principles are bed rest, giving steroids for lung maturity, giving tocolytics if we require the baby, if they're going into labor and you need to wait for lung maturity, just 1 or 2 days for the steroids to act, antibiotics because ascending infection can occur. Then fetal surveillance. Look for any evidence of distress. Fetal and maternal surveillance. Ideally, I would say you actually observe the baby and the mother. If mother is having the signs of infection and distress, baby also got signs of distress. And make sure there is no evidence of chorioamnionitis. These are the things you will be doing under expectant line of management for all patients who are not term. So we'll come to that. Anything management in different situations of different gestation age. So if it is 24 to 31 weeks, so less than 24 weeks, it is not even viable. Suppose somebody has come at 23 weeks, ruptured their membrane. That baby is not going to be viable. You simply terminate. There is no big question. Non-viable baby, you terminate. Now, once after 24 weeks, according to like say Western standard, they are viable babies up to 31 weeks. What do? Will you terminate immediately or you will do? So you could do an expectant management provided other things are all right. Means there is no evidence of distress. The membranes have closed or leak has stopped. Baby is fine. There's no maternal evidence of distress. There is no bleeding. And on scan, fetal heart is good and there's adequate amount of amniotic fluid. Then you can wait and let the pregnancy go on and you can continue till 34 weeks. However, if there is documented fetal lung maturity by the test, then you can terminate. So you will also give prophylaxis, GBS prophylaxis, and antibiotics because already you have ruptured the membranes. You need to prevent infection. Give steroids and tocolytics. However, tocolytics, there is no consensus whether to give or not. Now, next group is from 32 to 33 weeks. Here also the idea is to get them up to 34 weeks. The idea, at least if they can pull on till 34 weeks, you can try to pull it on, giving them GBS prophylaxis, antibiotics, and steroids. About steroids, there is again a doubt or controversy in the sense that in this gestation age, should you give or should you not give? Is it enough that the baby will have their own spontaneous lung maturity? So this is some consensus is not there on that. Now, next thing is beyond 34 weeks. If anything beyond 34 weeks and pre-ROM, you know that it is close to term, you can simply proceed to delivery. There is no need to wait. Either you can induce labor, or if there is something which will not happen by vaginal delivery, you can choose to do a cesarean section. However, you will give them a GBS prophylaxis. Now, so different stages, what are the problems? Pre-viable, less than 24 weeks, what are the problems? I told you, pulmonary hyperplasia, it is so small, less than 24 weeks. There is no way it is going to survive. The lungs are so immature, pulmonary hyperplasia. In 24 to 35 weeks, here, preterm, this is the problem, prematurity. Problems of prematurity in the baby like respiratory distress syndrome, intraventricular hemorrhages, necrotizing enterocolitis, or these are the problems of prematurity. At term, what is the problem with PROM? Here, there is no problem with prematurity. All the organs are mature. But because it got exposed, there can be ascending infection. Baby can get infected. So each gestational age, you have a different problem. Less than 24 weeks, pulmonary hyperplasia. 24 to 36 weeks, prematurity. At term, infection. So these are the main concerns when you're deciding management. So what were you going to do to simplify it very easily for you all? Before 24 weeks, pulmonary hyperplasia is there. There is no way baby will survive. So just induce labor and finish. That's all. We are not going to save that baby at all. If it is preterm, means 24 to 35 weeks. The problem is prematurity. So you don't want them to deliver immediately. You want to prolong, hospitalize them and prolong the pregnancy by giving steroids. You can do cultures, identify infections. You can give them antibiotics. So the mainstay is steroids, antibiotics, tocolytics. So these three you can do under hospitalization cover. Now, if it is term, I told you the only problem is infection. You don't want the patient to get infected. No, don't want the baby to get infected. Simply deliver, prompt delivery. As simple as that. So less than 24 weeks, terminate. Preterm baby, hospitalize and try to prolong labor or prolong the pregnancy, if possible, up to 34 weeks or more. At term, deliver, finish. So the rationale in management is why antibiotics, why corticosteroids, why tocolytics. So antibiotics are used to prolong the latency period. Latency period is time of rupture of membranes to delivery. It can be used to give prophylaxis against the group B streptococci in neonates. It can prevent maternal chorioamnionitis and neonatal sepsis. So that's the rationale in giving antibiotics. Now, why steroids? To enhance the fetal lung maturity so that there will be decreased risk of respiratory distress syndrome, less risk of intraventricular hemorrhage and necrotizing enterocolitis. Why tocolytics? So that you can delay the delivery to allow administration of corticosteroids. If you immediately terminate, there's no time for the steroids to act. So sometimes you can just win over by at least postponing it by 48 hours. So enough time is given for the steroids. However, there are certain controversies, as I told you. There are certain randomized trials showing that there hasn't been much improvement or delay in the pregnancy prolongation by tocolytics. So what is the regimen? What antibiotics do you want to give? So options are typically ampicillin 2 grams IV 6 hourly for 2 days. Then you can follow it with orals, of course, or you can give amoxicillin 500 per oral twice a day for 5 days. You can give azithromycin 1 gram oral single dose, or you can give erythromycin 250 milligrams twice a day for 5 days. So these are the various protocols of antibiotics that you can use. Now coming to steroids, what steroids do you want to give? You can have betamethasone or dexamethasone. If you are giving betamethasone, we can give typically 12 milligrams intramuscular once a day for 2 days. This is 24 hours apart. If you give dexamethasone, you give 6 milligrams every 12 hours, BD, twice a day for 2 days. So this dose is betamethasone once a day 12 milligrams or dexamethasone 6 milligrams twice. Both of them should be given for 2 days. That's the reason we need to delay our by tocolysis or whatever for 48 hours. Now, what tocolytics you want to give? You can give them nifedipine. So if at all you want to prolong or delay the labor, you can give them nifedipine tocolysis. Now, coming to chorioamnitis, the major thing that was worrying us was infection. And so it is important to identify who are the patients who are getting into chorioamnitis, because that's a definite diagnosis or definite indication for termination of pregnancy. So if you find two of any of these following symptoms or signs, you must terminate. What are they? Foul smelling vaginal discharge. Obviously, when there's infection, there will be vaginal discharge, which is foul smelling. Second, maternal pyrexia, more than 38 degrees centigrade, which can lead to maternal tachycardia, more than 100 beats per minute, which as a consequence, you find fetal tachycardia more than 160 beats per minute. And because the uterus is fully infected, any touch on that will show uterine tenderness. And if you investigate, you will find a leukocytosis, that is a WBC count more than 15,000 per millimeter cube. Any two of these, foul smelling discharge, maternal pyrexia, maternal tachycardia, fetal tachycardia, or uterine tenderness, on investigation WBC more than 15,000, any of these things can lead to or could identify chorioamnitis. Okay, so if you have identified chorioamnitis, you know, one, you have to terminate anyway, but to avoid further worsening of the infection, because chorioamnitis can lead to endomyometritis. That can lead to infection beyond the uterus, but like pelvic abscess, it can lead to bacteremia and so on, maternal sepsis. So you don't want it to spread. So the treatment would be always start with a triad. That means broad spectrum antibiotics, which covers all types of organisms. Ampicillin, gentamicin, metronidazole. Ampi for gram positive, meta for gram negative, and metronidazole for the anaerobic infections. So ampicillin you can give initially 2 gram IV, followed by 1 gram IV 6 hourly. Gentamicin you can give 5 milligrams per kg IV daily. And metronidazole 500 mg IV every 12 hours. So that typical triad of ampi, genta, metronidazole which we always use for broad spectrum infections. So next, if you find that the patient is allergic to penicillin, the next choice would be clindamycin. So you can give them clinda-genta combination. Clindamycin 600 milligrams 8 hourly with gentamicin 5 milligrams IV daily. So either of these, depending on the sensitivity for the patient, if they have any allergies, you switch to clindamycin. Now the bottom line that we all have to remember is, if chorioamnitis is present, if it has been confirmed by these two parameters that I told you, you have to deliver. Deliver the fetus at any cost. That is the most important point I want you to remember. So PROM can be very, very common. Once somebody has come with a complaint with a history of something leaking, you must confirm it by doing an examination, what we call a speculum examination. Put the speculum. If there's an obvious leak, you know it. If there is not a real leak, then you can actually ask them to cough or just press on the uterus, and that can release a little bit of gush. And you want to confirm it by diagnosis, you can always do an ultrasound, see the amount of liquor, or test that amount of fluid with various methods like your nitrazine test. You can do a Ferning test, you can do an amniosure, or as a last resort, if at all, as an invasive indigo carmine test. Once you have confirmed it, you have to see the general condition of the patient and the baby. So look for maternal well-being, fetal well-being. Maternal well-being would mean mother should not have any infection. There should be no chorioamnitis, and baby also should not have any problems in terms of fetal distress or fetal infection. for which you are going to do all the counts for the mother. You will also do an ultrasound to see the baby's position, the baby's weight, and any evidence of this. Make a decision. If all is fine, baby is preterm, you wait, you do an expectant management until the baby reaches 34 weeks. And what is that expectant management? Bed rest, antibiotics, steroids, tocolytics. This is your 4-pronged attack. The moment they reach 34 weeks, you terminate. If they have any problem during this expectant management, of course, you will terminate the pregnancy. And termination can be either vaginal or cesarean. If the cervix is favorable, you can induce labor and terminate. If it is not favorable, or there is a cord prolapse, or the baby is not in an ideal presentation, you will do a cesarean section. If all is fine and the baby is term, if it is a ruptured membranes, you will still deliver because there's a risk of infection. So you will divide your babies into pre-viable, preterm, and term. Pre-viable, they are not going to survive, so you will terminate. Preterm, you will wait and watch. If possible, you will allow it to go on till 34 weeks. If you don't have so much time and you cannot wait, at least win 2 days for the steroids to act. Give steroids, wait for 2 days, terminate. Those at term, they have risk of infection, so term. So that is the summary of this whole. So thank you for a patient hearing. I want all of you to go through this and read it yourself and make your notes. This is definitely an important topic in terms of exam point of view and of course as a clinical presentation.